Hello. This is a video about what to do about worry if you've identified that's something that's going on for you. This is a follow-on video from another one we did before where we laid out exactly how worry works, and there's a link for that in the description below. Let's just start with a little bit of a rundown, because what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a few different things that we can do to break into this cycle. But let's just revisit some of the principles that we're talking about here. So the idea is that you're more likely to see things as scary and you're more likely to feel anxious about stuff if you have had experiences that have taught you this is dangerous. So you're more likely to worry about dogs or feel on edge about dogs if you've been bitten by a dog. You're more likely to feel on edge about being embarrassed or rejected if you've been embarrassed or rejected before. You're more likely to worry about health if you've had experiences that show you that health is a real thing and something that's scary. So your history produces how scary things seem, which will help us understand just how worried you get about them. Your body kicks off, puts its foot on the accelerator and speeds everything up, and that's what produces those physical symptoms. So there's a couple of things we can do with that. Then you find yourself trying to find a solution. That is the point where we get stuck a lot of the time, is I'm trying to find a solution or trying to fix a problem that either isn't in my control or can't be 100% resolved. That is when we just get stuck on something and we can't let it go. Something that feels really important, feels like I should be able to fix it, but I actually can't. That leaves me doing all sorts of things like being really, really busy, checking, researching, trying to find a way out, trying to find a way to fix this. And then when I can't, I find myself distracting myself. I'm on my phone, I'm keeping busy. What I'm not doing probably is taking much care of myself because I'm too busy trying to resolve this problem. And before I know it, I'm exhausted and I'm a bit kind of like, what's the point in all of this? I'm trying so hard and I'm not getting anywhere. That's your summary. Let's talk about what do we actually do about any of this stuff then. I'm going to talk you through it this way around, but then I'm going to show you why we're going to treat it this way around. So if we're talking about recognizing that why I feel anxious makes sense considering my history, what we're not going to be able to do is take that anxiety away. Actually, the reason we're going to talk about starting with what you do before we deal with how you think is that you are more in control of what you do than you are in how you feel. It might not feel that way all the time, but my example would be I'm more in charge of my hands and my feet than I am in charge of my heart, if that makes sense. You can't help, for example, how angry you might feel, but you are more in control of what you do with your hands and your feet or your voice. You're more in control of that than you are in charge of your emotions. That's one reason we start with behaviour, and it kind of has a knock-on effect up the chain. But let's see what we can do. So if we're acknowledging that, first of all, we're probably not going to take away the history, the reason you feel anxious about some of these things is because your brain functions perfectly well. It has experienced things and it's gone, right, we need that to not happen again. We need to be on the lookout. That's what it's doing. But it can be confusing when you're in it because it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel like, oh, I'm just worrying about this because of my history. It just feels like this is true. This is all going to happen and it's going to be terrible. So the first thing we're aiming to do really, or work on, is I want to recognize my buttons. If I can just spend a bit of time learning about what I worry about and why I worry about those things, then instead of it just feeling like the truth, maybe what it will feel like, or one day I'll get to the point where I'll be able to say, hold on, I know what this is. I always worry about this because of this. This might not be actually a massive deal. It might just be that this is the thing that I worry about. And that's really helpful, because if you can recognize it as this is something that I'm worried about rather than this is going to happen, that's a good starting point in being able to choose how to respond. So recognizing my buttons. One way or another way of thinking about that can be, where is my mind? This is quite a useful thing to think about. Am I thinking about things that have happened? So am I thinking about the past? Am I worrying about something that's going to happen in the future or that might happen that hasn't happened yet? This kind of imaginary world. Or am I in the present? That is quite a nice way into, you don't have to understand all your history to be able to do that. It's a nice thing you can do straight away to be able to say, okay, let me ask myself that. Following on from that, one of the things to practice later down the line is when I recognise I'm in the future or I'm in the past, can I do something to bring my mind into the present? That's something we're going to cover over here. So one of the things you might do within therapy or within CBT, for example, is keep a worry diary. So you might write down when you notice yourself worrying, what am I worried about? What does it tend to be? That can be a way of identifying patterns. What do you typically tend to worry about? And it can help you recognize, am I in the past, am I in the present, or am I in the future? Let's talk about this one. This one is a really accessible one. So once you have been made to feel anxious, your brain has spotted something before you have a chance to consciously stop it. It's like if somebody pops a balloon, you flinch. You don't think and go, oh, is that a balloon or not? You flinch. That's the same with any kind of anxiety. The physical reaction kicks in before your conscious mind has a chance to do anything about it. So that means you might be sat with all these physical symptoms that you can't do anything with. But there are some elements of this that we can manipulate. So if you know that you're getting some of these physical symptoms, the other thing that happens when your body's kicked that process off is your thinking becomes slightly closed down anyway. Sometimes when you've been really worried about something or when you've been really angry about something, when you come out the other side of it, you go, what was I getting so worked up about there? And all that is when you're anxious, your thinking really narrows. So if we can just help your body take its foot off the accelerator a bit and just slow down a touch, that in itself can make quite a big difference. So stuff like breathing, stuff like remembering your posture. When you're anxious, you want to do this. And when you're not, you have a more open posture. And the pace with which you do things. When you're anxious, you just want to tear around the place. So purposefully doing things a little bit slower, giving yourself some time to breathe. Those things can make a huge difference early on, just in terms of taking the edge off some of that anxiety. All right then, let's talk about if I'm recognizing that I'm worrying about something, a good way of telling, am I worrying about something that I need to worry about, or am I stuck in this loop again, is these two things. They're quite difficult to get your head around sometimes. Is this actually in my control? Can I do anything about this? Which is a hard question to ask yourself sometimes, because let's say it's health. The answer might be, well, I think it is, when it actually isn't. Or maybe a better way of putting this is it 100% in my control? Is doing anything about this going to actually have as much of a difference as I want it to? And this is a tough one to ask as well. Is it my responsibility? So this is really hard with stuff like if you're worried about your kids or you're worried about somebody you love. It can feel like it is your responsibility to make sure they are okay. But it isn't actually totally your responsibility. It isn't actually totally in your control, because there are other people, and other people have free will. You have some responsibility maybe, but there are probably other people involved as well that have some responsibility too. But more to the point, there's only so much you can do for a person. So that is quite hard, but it's important to ask yourself, in order to identify the things that are keeping you stuck. So if I'm worried about somebody else and I keep taking responsibility for them, I keep offering to help, I keep doing whatever I can, you might find yourself caught in a loop if they're dealing with something that you can't fix. And actually, sometimes what it leads us to do is quite unhelpful things. So you'll recognise, particularly with kids or with family members, that you might want to fix stuff for somebody, and actually the messages they might be giving you are, back off. Or I don't want you to fix it for me, I just want you to be there for me. But while you're worrying and you feel responsible, maybe you won't feel that way. Maybe you'll be too busy trying to fix it to actually be available. And that's kind of heartbreaking, really. Or a good example with health is usually what we're worried about when we're worried about our health is, the reason I don't want to get ill and die is because I want to be around to be with my family and friends. But while I'm busy on the internet, seeing and Googling things, I'm not spending time with my family and friends. This is a really big question. It's an important one to work on and to ask yourself, but it's not the one that's going to change straight away. It probably is a domino that falls a little bit later. A good example again of something which might take a bit of time to think about, to chip away at, to keep questioning, but it's an important question to ask. Okay, let's talk about these behaviours. The ultimate aim over here And this is why it's hard to change these things on your own. The ultimate aim is to learn how to tolerate doubt. So, if what we're trying to do with checking, researching and seeking reassurance is I'm trying to find a 100% answer, is everything going to be okay? Can I find, let's say I'm worried about how my kids are getting on at school and whether they're going to make friends. Can I find an answer to that? Can I find a solution? Not really. Not really. Feels like maybe I can find some answers, but I keep jumping from one thing to the next. Or am I doing the right things at work? There's never really an end to that, because how it might feel to you is you're only as good as your last piece of work. Learning to tolerate doubt is about learning to live in line with this, which is if there's only so much I can do in order to have a kind of healthy life and leave some space for myself, what I probably need to do is to be able to stop at a point where probably or good enough is okay. If I give another example of, let's say you were trying to submit a piece of work like a presentation or an essay, you can always improve it. So how do you know when to stop? Probably what you have to learn to do if you really can't tolerate that doubt of I don't know whether I've done enough, is what you will find yourself doing is you'll keep working until the deadline. And that's the only time that you'll stop. And that in itself is exhausting. But what if instead you could learn to tolerate and get better at living with, I think this is good enough. Is it going to be okay? Probably. Or I've done enough, or I've done all I can. That is tough. Let's talk about how you actually do it. Some of the things you might have to do, I think it kind of boils down to leaving things unresolved. Some of the CBT language is tolerating uncertainty. So that's some of the things that we'll do. But as an example, leaving things unresolved. So if you were going to submit an essay, some of the tasks you might set yourself are, okay, I'm going to stop a week before my deadline and I'm just going to leave it there and sit with that doubt. Or if it's a worry about whether or not somebody's annoyed with you or whether you've done the wrong thing, you might have to send them a message. Let's say it was about saying no. And what I usually want to do is make sure that person is okay with me. The challenge might be to say no and then not look at my replies and just tolerate the feeling of, oh, I hope it's going to be okay. I hope it's going to work out all right. Some of that might just be starting out, just reducing the amount that you check things. So let's say it's about work and you find yourself rereading your notes or your emails just to make sure that nothing's gone wrong, and you find yourself reading it 2 or 3 times and that's really getting in your way. Just reducing it down to 2 rather than 3 is a good starting point, and then you can work from there. And what we're aiming for you to do is, what we're anticipating happening is you'll actually feel worse to begin with because you'll feel anxious because that doubt is still there. And that's the point. We're going to learn how to tolerate and learn how to sit with that doubt so that it doesn't feel scary anymore. That only happens through practice and repetition. Another example I would give is leaving things imperfect. So the example I always give is, I've only got this book to use. Let's use this book as an example. If I came in your house and made a picture in your house wonky, you might feel really uncomfortable with that. And actually, this is a good example of when you feel physically uncomfortable, what you really want to do, you feel like you have to fix it. I can't settle until I fix that. And that means you're not really in charge of what you get to do, because it's have to, not want to or choose to. I have to. And one way that we can help you deal with that is if I just came in your house and made a picture wonky and you had to look at it every day, the first day or 2 would be excruciating and you would be cursing me. But by the end of the week, it wouldn't bother you so much anymore. And that might feel completely alien and impossible to understand, but it's kind of the same process as getting used to anything. You know, like if a child is nervous on day 1 of school, as long as everything goes all right, by day 50, they're all right, really, most of the time, unless something else is kicking off. It's the same process. Your brain learns, oh, that felt uncomfortable, but we didn't die, so that must be okay. That's the same process. Practice and repetition. Right. Let's talk about this stuff, this distraction malarkey. The reason these are such a problem is because you don't want to have to live your life this way. You don't have to bury your head in the sand all the time. These activities tend not to be particularly fun, or they have a consequence that isn't good. So using booze, for example, means that I don't sleep very well. Then that makes me more anxious the next day, etc., etc. Or online shopping has its own problems. Being distracted means that I don't spend as much time with the people that I know and love. That's a problem too. But what can be really hard is if I said to you, okay, I want you to stop distracting yourself so much. I want you to just put your phone down and just sit. Just put your phone down and just sit. You ain't going to feel very comfortable with that. You'll probably be like, I don't know what to do. Just feeling physically uncomfortable. And that's really horrible. I certainly identify with this. So if there's something on my mind and that I'm struggling to let go of, and I'm trying to spend time with my kids, for example, if I do that by just trying to wrestle my mind into the room, so asking, where am I? And I just try and concentrate on them, I find it quite hard. My mind is pinging off all over the place. So some of the things that I would suggest starting first is giving yourself a bit of a chance to do things that actually mean something to you. So don't expect yourself to just suddenly, okay, I'm not going to distract myself anymore, but I'm going to do something, mundane and boring and expect myself to suddenly be okay with that. Actually, the things that I would recommend are using your senses. So anything that involves the senses, that might be physical movement or touch, it might be smells, it might be taste, it might be things you can hear, it might be things you can look at. They tend to help you remain in the present a little bit more easily. It's that mindful approach. It's a little bit easier to do. It's a little bit easier to be in the room if you've got some physical cues that let you do that. But also, if you make it meaningful, the whole problem with some of these distraction activities, and the only way I would define the difference between unhelpful distraction and kind of useful, keeping your mind on something nice, is, do you enjoy it? Or do you get something from it? If the answer is no, it's probably distraction. If the answer is yes, then great, you've just had a bit of time doing something good. That's all right, isn't it? Sensory meaningful activity. It's proper therapist language, that, isn't it? But you get what I mean. We're using your senses, and it's something that actually means something to you. So my example would be at bath time. It's my job to do bath time usually. Well, shared, but it's technically my job, and then I'm too slow, so I don't get to finish it all. Is if I'm worried about something and I'm just trying to watch the kids, I'm just trying to interact with them, just like sat up, sat on the loo next to the bath, I actually find it hard to concentrate on them. And when I'm worried, all I really want to do is get my phone out, but I don't want to be that guy really. So trying to be in the room, the things that help me is if I get down on my knees next to the bath. It's not good for my knees, but it's good for being there. And I put my hands in the water. So the warmth of it, and then maybe they're like splashing around. If I sing with them, that helps me stay in the room a lot better, actually. And I don't have to think about it too much. It's something that I like doing, so it helps me be there. This is also an explanation for why stuff like walking, you're more likely to just have a little bit of a better time if you go for a walk than if you try and relax or stop worrying in a dark room on your own. Giving yourself some sensory cues is really good. What we're also fighting against though, with doing this, is you've got to try and stop and do something nice. And usually what that kicks off is, if some of your worrying stuff is about constantly feeling like you should be doing more, you might find that it's kind of physically excruciating. Like you're just trying to sit and have a cup of tea in the garden might be really uncomfortable. So genuinely, the other things that I would suggest is start slow. Don't expect yourself to have half an hour just sitting and not thinking about anything. If you've never really been able to do that, half an hour is going to be way too much. Just give yourself 5 minutes. See if you can do it for 5 minutes while you're having a cup of tea or something, because a cup of tea is warm, you can smell it, you can taste it, and just see if you can just sit for a while. But you don't have to be zen sitting down. I actually find it easier if I know I'm a bit worked up about something and I want to have 5 minutes, just kind of break, help my mind kind of relax for a bit. I find it might sound strange, but just sort of pacing up and down in the garden, I find that a lot more effective. Or if I'm trying to have a break in this room, this is where I do all my work, I might lie down on the floor and look up at the ceiling. It's just a different body position, and it just gives my body a little bit more opportunity to unclench a bit, is how I would put it. But the other reason to focus on meaningful activity, stuff that actually means something to you, is because if your life has been checking, working and distracting, that is pretty miserable. So doing meaningful activity might be stuff like painting or drawing, it might be stuff like walking, it might be stuff like gardening. It doesn't have to be major. In fact, the simpler the better. You will have a better time, and the better time you have, the more this eases up a little bit in total. And it brings us down here. Some of the consequences of being stuck in this cycle mean you're exhausted and demoralised, like you can't be bothered to face things, you don't know what to do. It's worth actually, if all we're changing to begin with is just giving yourself better breaks and helping you actually turn off and switch off every now and then we're probably going to have quite a big impact over here. That is why we start here. Taking care of my body. So just stuff like, don't work 8 hours solid. Have a break, for Pete's sake. Or feed yourself. When you're worried and you're anxious, you don't really want to, and you don't have time to eat properly. But if all we change is just taking a few minutes, so when I have my lunch, I'm just going to eat, maybe have a bit of music on, something like that, you'll notice that you are giving yourself a better chance to have a little bit of energy. And this is quite a difficult concept and requires some work up here usually, which is leaving energy in the tank. So one of the things we're stuck doing over here is somebody else is suffering, for example, so I'm going to try and fix it. I'm going to spend all my time on them, and I can't relax until it's fixed. And that means that I use all my energy. So this is very common with work. I only know when to stop when I physically collapse. That's not very helpful or very sustainable. It makes total sense because I feel physically uncomfortable walking away from the computer screen or walking away from work before it's all done. So, but I have to leave some energy in the tank. Because if I leave energy in the tank, I give myself a better chance of actually recuperating. And I leave some energy for the things that are outside of the thing that I'm worried about. My family, my friends, my kids, whatever it might be. So that's something to practice as well. So in summary, these are all the things we try and do, but we take them in this order. Behaviour first. So can we practice, rather than I'm tempted to distract, let's practice recognising when I'm trying to pick up my phone, and let's see if I can do something sort of sensory and something that means for something to me instead. If you can do that and you can get to that point and you can practice doing that, that's really powerful, because essentially what that leaves you with is no matter what's going on around you, no matter what's triggering off, you know that even when you're anxious, you can still choose to do things that are good for you. And that is massive. So it's a lot more effective to start here, I think. Then we go into tolerating things and recognising, but behaviour and the physical stuff are some really accessible and really good ways in to start taking a bit of control over how much this affects you and the way in which it affects you. That's the idea. We're going to do a couple more videos on each of these in a bit more detail, but as an overview, that's where we start.